Hello, my name's Sue Monk-Rickett, and I and my husband Chris Monk-Rickett are going to be delivering this seminar on self-care and caring for the carers. We are both registered accredited counsellors with the Association of Christian Counselling, and I'm chair of the Association of Christian Counselling, ACC. At Spring Harvest, our normal roles would be to be leading one of the pastoral teams, and often we've spoken on pastoral care seminars as well. So we'd like to welcome you from Spring Harvest at home. We'd like to welcome you into our own homes, into our home, and also we'd like to thank you for welcoming us into your home as you experience Spring Harvest in this way. So I'm going to hand over to Chris as we explore this whole aspect of self-care and how we as carers care for ourselves.
Yeah, it is absolutely imperative, with particular regard to the amount of stresses and anxiety that anyone in any caring role at the moment is likely to be experiencing. This, some of what we're saying is stuff that we do through our own organisation for people in professional caring roles, particularly Christians as well. But it really is for anyone in any caring role at the moment. The basic principles are the same. We have some concern of what is going on with frontline healthcare staff, for instance. But it can apply to all of us where we are. We can't go to church on a Sunday. We can't be face to face with people. Um, and it's absolutely imperative for the sake of our well-being and our families that we look after ourselves, both in the short term and to learn to do it in the long term. And I have to say, we carers, we are not very good at doing this. Track record and the level of burnouts and what have you does not look good. So, in order to effectively care for others, we need to be actively looking after our own mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being and health. Jesus said to us, there are a few principles to begin with, or commanded us, if you like, love God and then love your neighbour as yourself. He did not say, as sadly is often the case with us, as we shall see, love your neighbour instead of yourself, nor did he say love yourself through loving your neighbour, which is a trap we carers can easily fall into. Our ability to healthily care for ourselves and then others is primarily determined by two factors. One is our own security in knowing who we are. And I'll say a little bit about Jesus in a minute. We do not need to have, in other words, a caring role to make us feel valued or significant or good enough. Um, that's probably determined by a lot of things, but are we secure? Do we know ourselves? Are we secure in ourselves? Do we accept ourselves? In addition, our ability to take in for ourselves ways of having our own needs met first before trying to meet the needs of others. And just an illustration of what happens if we don't do this. We're not flying anywhere at the moment, but we've all flown places. I used to be scared of flying. I appeared to have got out of that. Having a flying lesson helped. But if you think about some of the safety procedures on an aircraft, and one in particular, to quote, we've all seen these, in the unlikely event of an emergency, fit your own oxygen mask first before attending to children or dependents. Basically, if you are gasping for air or you're going to hypoxia and you'll collapse very quickly, you can't help other people. We may be able to, as it were, breathe life into those we are caring for a time, but if we do not take in enough oxygen and nutriment, and in this case oxygen as it were, including how we look after ourselves physically and regularly, we will collapse in the end. I would actually suggest for Christians there's something more to that than this. As Christians, if we see ourselves, if we really believe as being made in the image of God and in relationship with Him, part of His creation that He loves, welcomes, and values, it's part of our discipleship to care for ourselves, not just to benefit others, but really at the heart of this love your neighbour as yourself commandment is to value ourselves as God values us. And it's a healthy way to live. This is not a theology lecture or a Bible study, but Jesus knew how to self care and did it throughout his life. And because he knew who he was, and because he was suitably fed and nurtured himself, and knew exactly who he was able to do the most menial of tasks um, without being negatively affected by it, without being damaged, without needing to do it. He was secure in who he was. If you look in the passage on washing the disciples' feet, it starts with he knew, he knew, he knew. And in the NIV, I think it is, and it says, so he got up, he was able to go and wash the disciples' feet. It was a shocking thing to do in many ways. He took time away from people. He went off on his own to pray. He allowed others to care for him. And if you look, the wedding at Cana and so on, he had fun, he had friends. And the advantages of when we do look after ourselves properly as carers, we're in a much stronger place to give our time and energy to others without burning ourselves out. And probably, perhaps this should be the other way around. We will have more energy for family, friends, and other activities, and all round we will live well or better than otherwise. Now, I want to talk at this point about some specific issues for people in the caring professions and other caring roles, wherever you are that you're caring at the moment. Now, as Christians who care and we're commanded to care, and Jesus is with us, we do care. But compassion is our greatest strength. People respond to being genuinely cared for more than anything else. And the compassion is our greatest strength that we can bring to our caring roles. But it is also the aspect that makes us most vulnerable. If we're dealing with more than one person, we may be in a position, some of us, where the requirements of confidentiality mean that we cannot receive immediate input and empathy from our colleagues, family, other church members. We may have to step back, we have to hold things to ourselves. We may be working with an ever present element of not knowing what issues, emotions, and demands and fluctuating situations and emotions may arise from one day to the next, or perhaps at the moment, even from 1 hour to the next. We may find ourselves having to manage something that feels beyond us, or we may be faced with something that personally feels too close, or or both, where particularly at the present time there may be no immediate extra help available. We cannot also, none of us like being out of control, basic human sort of sense of well-being, but we cannot control the outcome of our caring, nor can we fix the problems, and frankly, we shouldn't be trying. That is not a healthy way to care. But no matter how well we care, things happen. And particularly if we're isolated at the present time, if we're all indoors, hopefully. But particularly if we can't actually physically do what we normally do, this is only just adding to the problems. And we do need to remember, or take time to remember, we are not responsible for other people's lives, just for what we offer them and how we carry that out. some mention the current situation, some other specific issues for us at the moment. The whole situation in this country is causing more issues to rise and intensify. The loneliness of the isolated. Um, think of people at home who don't understand why they're not allowed out, perhaps dementia sufferers, don't understand why their perhaps friends and family aren't coming to visit them. Possible rise in domestic abuse, family tensions. We've talked about this in Coping with Loss and Change thing as well, seminar we've done as well. We may have to deal with more traumatic situations than before, more deaths or dramatic and traumatic losses, which may be affecting people's jobs, whatever, that are made heightened because of not being able to be with their relatives and friends. The way in which we care has had to change or stop. We may feel helpless to meet the needs. That's a natural reaction, but it actually isn't good for our sense of well-being. Our levels of anxiety and stress may be rising. We live in a society where the levels of stress and anxiety in general are rising, and other mental health issues. And remember, as we're human beings, we as carers have our own stresses, our own concerns, our own fears for our own futures and our families that we have to deal with. Just one principle which I'll borrow from Rick Warren about, because caring is basically one of the most fundamental elements of discipleship. That whoever we are, whatever our resources, abilities, as Rick Warren puts it in one of his videos, we are free to donate. Use that term again, free to donate to the work of the kingdom of God. We are not compelled. We won't be loved less if we don't. We need that sense of freedom. So that is an honest response. I'd just like to have a couple of quotes about the impact of not self-caring if we ignore the warning signs. This is a quote from Françoise Mathieu, who's the founder of Compassion Fatigue Solutions, talking about what can happen to all of us, compassion fatigue. The profound, gradual emotional and physical exhaustion that helping professionals, I'd add there any carer, professional or not, can develop over a period of time. It eventually affects our ability to tolerate strong emotions and difficult stories in others, in both our caring, professional, and our personal lives. Basically, we conk out in both places with whatever the consequences are. And another quote about burnout. Particularly, this is designed for Christian leaders. From the person who used to lead our pastoral team at Spring Harvest for many, many years, long-standing friend of ours, the sadly late Reverend Colin Buckland, a book called Freedom to Lead, which is out of print, I'm afraid, at the moment. Defined burnout for carers as following: the exhausting of the inner resources that enables a carer to go on caring, the using up of the essential inner you, rendering the individual in a serious condition of dysfunctionality. Yes, jargon term, he was a counsellor, very good one. The spending of self on others in such a way that the inner bank balance has gone into red. It's like running, the effect is, you can imagine running a car engine without oil. Sooner or later, you will splutter to a halt. We have so much finite energy. If we continuously use up more resources than we possess, and we don't take more in to balance it up, we will eventually burn out with all sorts of physical, emotional, relational issues. It's not just being tired or exhausted, it is something that is actually serious levels of damage to ourselves. Just to give you an illustration of this, I'm just wondering. There's a picture there of with "Don't be a boiled frog" on it. I wonder how many of us have ever tried to boil a frog in a pan of water. No, none of us. There's a surprise. Um, this is quite a good. This is apparently true. If we were to get hold of a frog and throw it into a pan of boiling water, it will jump straight out, presumably on a reflex action, and look after itself. If we take that very self same frog and put it into a pan or a saucepan of cold water, and then gradually turn up the heat, it will allow itself to be boiled to death. And that is what can happen with us if we continuously get stressed, anxious, traumatized, and we do not care for ourselves in the process. It may be possible to overcook it, as it were, ourselves for a short period of intense work, which may be necessary at this time, but we really must balance this afterwards. If we just keep on, Sue will take her into some of the ghastly effects that can actually happen to us.
Okay, so just want to expand a bit on that concept of stress and burnout. And often we think of stress as being a bad thing, as something that's not good for us. But actually, we do all need a certain level of stress in our lives, because a certain level of stress is what actually gives us the ability to function, to do things. If we have too little stress, uh, we actually can end up in that place where we actually have no purpose. There's no motivation. We're bored. We're depressed. And if you think the classic case is when someone's made redundant, there's no actual stress that's making them do anything on a day-to-day basis. And that, as we know, can lead to depression and boredom and just really giving up in some ways. So we all have a certain level of stress at which we function best, which is kind of the long-term optimal level that we need to have in our lives. And that will be different for each of us. And it's not that anyone's better than each other, it's just how we're made and how we function. We can move out of that kind of optimal level of stress and go beyond that for a certain period of time. So if you think, there will be times in your life when there's been extra work pressure, when a crisis situation has hit, and you've kind of had to step up a gear and make something happen much more quickly, much more intensely, or juggle many more things at once. And that's fine. We're all created. God has created us to be able to do that, to be able to live in that heightened level of stress for a period of time. But what we're designed to do is to not live in that heightened period of stress forever or for an ongoing period, or that we have too short a time periods between each stressful event to recover. If we go into that kind of situation where we're permanently living in stress, or we're not allowing ourselves, or we're in a situation where just one stressful event is happening after another, that's when we can end up in the place of burnout, as Chris has described, where basically almost our body blows a fuse and says, can't handle this anymore. And we actually collapse. And we are in a place of, as Chris described, our body, our emotions, our physicality all just becomes dysfunctional. So we're going to look for a minute about what are some of the warning signs. How do we know when we're getting overstressed, when we're not caring for ourselves, when we could be at that point when burnout's starting to take over? And we're going to look at several aspects of our lives, which are not separate really. They're all interlinked and they will all have an impact on each other. We're going to look at work, our physical well-being, our relational well-being, our psychological well-being, our emotional well-being, and our spiritual well-being. So how do we know when perhaps things are going a bit wrong, when we should be listening to the warning signs? So let's start by thinking about work. We may find that we're enjoying what we do less and less. It's less rewarding. It feels less meaningful. It's a chore as opposed to the work that we once enjoyed. We may become bored or disinterested or very irritated by the people that we work with or the people that we care for. And each day feels as though the challenge is too much. We wake up thinking the challenge of today is more than we can cope with. Physically, we may feel that we are run down, we're tired. No matter how much sleep we have, our energy is not restored. We may have disturbed sleep or disturbed diet. We're not eating properly, we don't want to eat, or we want to eat too much. We may start to feel that there are physical illnesses that we're starting to feel, headaches, pains, aches, old injuries that we thought had disappeared suddenly come back. We become more prone to things like colds and infections. And all of that is saying that our body is so trying to stay in this emergency stress level that it hasn't actually got the ability to fight. The immune system is kind of collapsing on us. Relationally, we may find that we feel more and more emotionally and relationally isolated from our friends and from our family. We may find it very difficult to actually talk to them, to enjoy what would have been social times. We can't separate work and life. We take our work home with us and we have no time for other people, for the people that usually are surrounding us or we would normally enjoy being with. And we may find that there's increased level of irritation and conflict. The little things, the kicking the cat syndrome, the little things that would normally have just passed us by, we wouldn't mind about, become very irritable to us because our stress level is so high. And linked very much to that is our emotions. We may feel emotionally exhausted and drained. We've got no more to give out at home or to anyone. We may find that we've lost our sense of humour. Our sense of humour is vitally important. People often that work in caring roles have a very strange sense of humour, but it actually keeps them going. And if we lose our sense of humour, we've kind of lost something that can change how we feel about ourselves. Actually changes the hormones that are in our bodies when we laugh, when we smile. We may find that we have outbursts of emotions that are out of all proportion to what's happening. Again, that kind of kick the cat syndrome. Something tiny happens and we explode. And we may feel also that we're much more startled and anxious than normal. We're kind of living in a place where anything can set us off. And psychologically, we may have disturbed concentration. We may start to feel stress, panic attacks, anxiety, or depression. And stress and depression and anxiety and depression are all very interlinked. And we're less able to just deal with the everyday things. Everything becomes too much, too challenging. And for us as Christians, spiritually, we can find that we have less and less interest in our spiritual life. We question our own faith. We're not interested in what once we found helpful or beneficial to us. And at the bottom of it all, I guess the question is, where is God? And what have I got to hope for? That loss of hope when we find ourselves in a place of burnout is really significant and really does have a major impact on us. So that's some of the impacts and the warning signs of general kind of stress and burnout. But I just want to talk for a moment about what trauma can do to us as well. When we're in a caring role, how we can experience trauma, what it does to us in our bodies, before we go on to look at how we might be able to build in things that help us in these situations. So I'm going to ask Chris to just turn his head for a moment, because he's my visual aid, as it were.
My best profile.
Yeah, your best profile.
Thank you.
So, I want you to imagine the brain, and there's this sort of front bit of the brain here is what's called the frontal lobes or the frontal cortex, and that's kind of what operates in normal situations. That's our thinking brain. That's where we logically can process information. We can deal with situations that are going on around us. And that's the bit that hopefully you're all in control of at the moment. That's the bit that's working. That's the bit of your brain you're using to listen to us. Behind it, there's a bit that's called our limbic system. And that's the bit that comes into play in stressful situations or trauma situations. That's the bit which says it's no good just logically thinking about this kind of situation. We've got to react. And you may have heard of the concept of fight or flight. Something's happened. We've just got to kick up a gear and we react. And it sends messages to the very back of our brain, which can be called sometimes our instinctual brain or our mammalian brain, which is actually all about bodily functions. So this bit says there's a stressful situation, do something. And so we know that if we're in stress, our heart rate goes up, our breathing rate changes. We may suddenly find that we have, for a temporary period of time, more and more energy. We're more and more able to do things that require strength. And so actually the frontal lobes bit isn't working anymore. It's being overridden by this middle bit that's saying there's a situation where you need to react, do something, and it's setting the whole body into motion. And that's a fantastic, you can turn around now, that's a fantastic designed thing by God to deal with trauma or to deal with high stress situations. But what it can do is that it can mean that we actually, if we continuously live in those circumstances, we are almost, every time we have a traumatic situation, we kind of go into something that's either called hypervigilance or hypovigilance. And that means in hypervigilance, that's where we're kind of in the fight flight situation, where we're basically we're just trying to escape or fight something. And hypovigilance is where basically our body shuts down. We can't deal with the situation, so we kind of shut down completely. And we can go into those hyper or hypo parts because we need to at different times. But we also need in the middle to have something that's actually where we are in control, where we are, our feelings, our reactions, our thoughts are balanced and regulated, and we feel that actually we aren't being in a stressful situation. What tends to happen when people experience or we experience trauma is that kind of window, it's sometimes called a window of tolerance, where we're managing life well, it can get narrower and narrower. And so something triggers us and we go into hyper or hypo more frequently. Or we find ourselves in a place where there is no respite. There's no point at which we come back into that window of tolerance. And we're permanently living perhaps in hypervigilance. We're permanently anxious. We're permanently waiting for the next thing to happen. Or hypovigilance, where we basically, the only way we can cope is to shut down. As carers, we may experience those kind of traumatic stress reactions because of our own personal traumas, and the situation that we're in at the moment, you may have experienced your own personal traumatic situation. But we may also experience them from hearing traumatic stories, from seeing something that's actually about another family or something happen, but it's a traumatic situation. And in the counselling world, that's called vicarious trauma. So it's not about my personal trauma, but I have absorbed almost the traumatic reactions that from seeing or hearing other people's traumatic stories. Sometimes vicarious trauma can happen almost as an instant. I hear something and it really impacts me. Or sometimes, like the frog, it's a gradual build-up. But whatever it is, whether it's our own personal trauma or a vicarious type trauma, we may experience things like flashbacks or nightmares where we recreate the scenes in our mind. We may feel that the only way to cope is that we almost disengage completely from the traumatic story. We shut it out completely. We don't process it, and it kind of gets stuck in our brains, but we refuse to process it or deal with it. After most traumatic events or when we've experienced trauma, the world feels a slightly less safe place. And so we're always a bit more on our hypervigilance. We're always waiting for something to go wrong. And as I've said, there's the whole realm of physical reactions to trauma, the heart rate, the panic attacks, the change in breathing, the body functions, all of those things. We can't separate the reactions of our body from the traumatic experiences that we have.
We're going to come on to talk about some methods, some simple practical methods of self-care. Just again to go with what stops us, what sort of subtle or not so subtle things actually stops us from actually looking after ourselves. So we stop and think about it. Of course, we've got to look after ourselves. Well, we can get into a thing where we can view self-care as an indulgence rather than as a necessity. We feel we're there to meet as carers the problems of others, and we shouldn't be spending time sort of luxuriating ourselves. Again, this is the wrong. We're not loving ourselves as God loves us. And in the wider sense, we live in a society, in the West, we live in a society that only values doing and achievement. If you think about it, in some places, the word satisfactory actually means unsatisfactory. If you're in lots of caring or various professions, you've always got to do better the year after, you've got to do more, you've got to achieve more, you've got to get better results. And sadly, we Christians this really is the standard and pattern of this world. It's utterly graceless. And we too often do triple back somersaults to outperform the world with its own standards if we're not careful. And we can end up with a feeling as a carer that everyone counts but the carer. That is commonplace out there. And it may well be commonplace for us. This may be the view that we secretly, deep down, believe about ourselves as carers, and we will live out what we really believe about ourselves and God. We think we do not have the time. We're too busy. There's somebody else. There's another person. And on a temporary basis, that may be true once for a short period. But we need to make the time. We need to make the time. We need to value ourselves. The lives and problems of the people we're caring for, there's things going on locally we've heard this week, can seem so serious, so important that we dismiss our concerns and of those immediately around us as our problems, our things as being insignificant. This is a common thing. We do not want to let people down. Seeking standards of excellence, seeking to do our best, seeking to serve others, these are good things. But if we do not want to let people down, ultimately, have we got this secret feeling we're not good enough for God? Or we perhaps ultimately feel we're letting God down? And if we do, are we really showing my grace is sufficient for you comment from God? Are we saying that to ourselves? Are we showing sufficient grace to ourselves? That's, I think, the way I'd like to put that. And we can grow comfortable in our underlying discomfort. It feels safe simply because it has become the norm. And maybe even beyond that, we can get a temporary buzz out of doing it. What happens is we can become addicted to our own stress hormones. And like any other addiction, it provides a temporary, short-term fix. It does achieve something for us, but the long-term damage can be quite serious. I mean, physically, living perpetually on excess stress and anxiety can cause heart attacks, among other things. And finally, how we view our Christian ethos. Really, perhaps drawing this together. This is a comment that's actually made to counsellors from somebody called Elizabeth Venart, the American Counselling Association Task Force on Counsellor Wellness. With the people who are meant to be really are the experts at caring for others, apparently. But this can apply to all of us, and I can assure you, us counsellors are just as prone to the traps. Those drawn to work in caring, i.e., us as Christians, among others, may have learned at an early age to become other focused rather than self focused. That is, in the first place. As a result, they may not feel they need or deserve the same nurturing that they accept others need and deserve. Oh, we're martyring we're crucifying ourselves, really, by this, and really just rescuing people. They may have exceptionally high standards for themselves, possibly perfectionism, and yet be compassionate and forgiving of the shortcomings, mistakes, or inconsideration of others. It is this thing of showing grace to ourselves as well as learning to do that. Again, our opinion of ourselves and God's opinion of us are different if we're doing this, and guess who's wrong? If we don't self-care, just a few practical things we can start to cope, inevitably we'll start to cope in the wrong way. If we fill up our time with caring, the first thing that tends to go with us Christians is our prayer life. Now, what your prayer life is, what Sue's is, what my personal prayer life is, we're individuals. Hopefully we do something that in a way that's absolutely right for us. What are the other ways we cope wrongly? Something called self-medication. This doesn't mean queuing up for Boots at the moment. It means things like excess alcohol, drugs, food, sex. It really doesn't matter what it is. It's just something that meets a temporary need. One really is no better or worse than the other. We keep, and this is where we get this addiction to caring, really, through by keeping and taking on more and more caring roles, working harder and harder to fill our time and avoid the symptoms. To minimise the level of stresses, we ignore the alarm bells or we switch off completely. So what actually can we do? There's a lot of grim stuff in there, and this is a serious topic, but there are lots of things we can do. Now, what we cannot do in changing is recognise that we cannot change many of the risk factors that are involved. In some ways, compassion fatigue is a normal, consequential, or occupational hazard in the first instance, not a disorder. And it exists on a continuum in nearly all caring professions and roles, that's a fact. But we can look after ourselves better in them. So it's important to understand the risks for ourselves and recognise the potential impact on us. Prevention is much better than cure. Develop some form of self-monitoring process, and again, in times of crisis, that can be difficult, to recognise your own warning signs. And your warning signs and mine will be possibly quite different. To intervene then, to work out and carry out preventative action, even if that means having to say no for a bit. To look at how we manage our time of caring and to keep good boundaries. In our professional counselling work, we're required to stick to a set of ethics and practice, and good practice, part of which is both physical and psychological boundaries. And that's important. The more informal your caring role, or the more there isn't a set of ethics, the more risk that the boundaries get blurred, and that can cause a whole load of other problems. If we're on the stage of burnout, compassion fatigue, whatever you want to call it, or even worse, vicarious trauma occurs, know what actions we can take, and indeed to protect ourselves do need to take, and then take it, and get as much good independent support for ourselves as we can. And there are two aspects of self-care: then the short term and the ongoing care that will live more healthily in the long term and improve and help all our relationships, our lives, and all aspects of our lives, because one will affect the caring role will affect the rest of our lives, and the rest of our lives will affect the caring role. Sue's been talking about. Oops, sorry, that's a bit of technology going crazy. Some emergency self-care. Just going to teach you very briefly some grounding techniques. If at any way we're caring, we feel we're being traumatized, overstressed out, can't cope, we're getting the reactions, some excess anxiety, stress, panic attacks. They're scary, but they won't kill you, and so on. It is vitally important to get yourselves back into the present, to get your frontal lobes in control again. I don't know what sort of stress is different. Having somebody's hand on your head, I think. Um, I'm just going to teach you a few techniques. And as I said, this seminar hopefully will be available with some notes on the website. Some calm physical movement, getting the body working differently, switching out. Stand up or sit down, have a drink of water, stretch, stamp your feet, rub your arms and legs, clap, walk around. And really important, focus on concrete, safe objects. You're getting yourself into, if you like, an internally safe place, a safe, calm place. So notice the colours, the shapes. We're sitting in a conservatory, so start to count the slats on the blinds, for instance, or the number of windows, or anything that's concrete, anything that's definite and concrete. So tensing and then relaxing muscles if that's safe for you to do so. And learn to take slow, calm breaths. And breathing out on this is important as well. Don't hold your breath, but slow, calm breaths, and try and breathe from the diaphragm. And talk to yourself. Never mind if everybody thinks you're going mad. Talk to yourself. It is okay. I am safe. I am here. My name is anything that works. Counting backwards from 10, taking steady breaths. That's another well-used technique to calm yourself down. Carry some kind of grounding object to hold on to. A stone, a small object, something that feels right for you. Many Christians like to use a holding cross. They're designed, if they're done well, to fit into the hands. If you've got a little more time, there's a technique called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Think about 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, and if you can, actually touch them, 2 things you can smell or like the smell of, and 1 slow, deep breath. Notice how concrete and real and grounded and practical that is. And it's just to get you back under self-control.
Okay, so that's some of the things, the grounding techniques are really for those situations where, as Chris said, we suddenly find ourselves with anxiety or a panic attack, or we just feel our stress levels rising really high, and we need to quickly get ourselves back into a safe, grounded place. But I'm just going to now look at a few more things, which is kind of the more longer term, the ongoing self-care. And how do we do that? And just taking those 6 sort of areas that I mentioned about warning signs a bit earlier on, going to look at those and what we can do for each of those. So if we start with our work, we may be able to think of ways that we can reduce the level of stress that's actually in our work. It may be the way that we do things, the time of day that we do things, the order that we do things, how we break up our work day. If we are able to support each other in our work, how do we do that? And that might be harder in the current situation. But I'm just thinking at ACC, all of our staff are working remotely, but we've said we want them every lunchtime to have a little WhatsApp conversation where they just chat to each other normally. And so it's actually keeping that connectedness, but it's giving them a time out, not to just sit and work without any kind of breaks. What do we know each other's, if we're working in a team, do we know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and do we actually use those to the best of our ability? Make sure that we do, and this is even harder in situations where a lot of us will be working from home, that we have a break in the day just to unwind, to do something different, move from where you sit and do your work to another place, do something that isn't work related. It doesn't have to be for long, but it's just breaking that sense of not escaping, the treadmill really. Physically, how do we look after ourselves physically? Well, we've talked a lot about physical symptoms, and it's really important that we learn to listen to our body. If we don't listen to our body, it will just scream louder and louder, and the pain and the physical symptoms will get worse and worse. Think about our diet. Think about our sleep patterns. Think about what we could do to improve both of them if we can. Take regular exercise. We're being encouraged to do that, and it's interesting how much the government are talking about that in terms of mental health, that actually doing physical exercise is really important. If you can, build in something every day that's kind of a de-stressing and a relaxing activity for yourself. Again, doesn't have to be long. Something like listening to a piece of music, or drawing, or knitting, or singing, or doing an actual meditative breathing type exercise, which Chris is going to demonstrate at the end of the session. Try to avoid self-medication, all those things that we use to cope but aren't good for us. And if we are in a bad situation physically, then seek medical help, seek help outside of ourselves. So relationally, how do we care for ourselves relationally? Having good, supportive friends that you know that you can talk to, you know you can share the demands that are on you. It doesn't have to be you share the details, but you just share of yourself, how you're feeling. People that make you laugh, people that are fun, and you can still do stuff online at the moment, even if you can't meet physically, you can still have these relationships. Do things regularly that are just pleasure for you, and taking those breaks in the day, having some time at the end at each week, which is not about work, which is actually just spending some time with people that are fun, that are inputting into you. And when we're all allowed to escape again, actually have some holiday time as well. And make allowances for when you are going through difficult times. When you're not coping well, make allowances for that. There's no shame in asking other people for help. And really important, but one that many of us never do, is learn to say no without feeling guilty. Saying no is one thing, saying no but not feeling guilty is an entirely different thing, but that's where we need to get to. And spiritually, how do we look after ourselves spiritually? Some kind of regular spiritual input that works for you, whatever that is, and it will be different for all of us. There's no one way that's right. Whatever works for you, have something that is actually your spiritual input, not where you're giving out, but where you're actually just taking in and absorbing. In many ways, this whole coronavirus has meant that there's so many more resources online. Make use of something just for you. Have someone that is prepared to pray with you or for you, for your work and for you as an individual. Might be a prayer partner or a group of people, but someone that you know is supporting you in prayer and is caring for you. And then lastly, psychologically, how do we care for ourselves psychologically? I just want to read a little quote from a lady called Babette Rothschild, who's done an awful lot of work around trauma. And she said this: Keeping something in reserve doesn't make us heartless and cold. Far from it. The most heartfelt and healing work we do is when we are in complete control of ourselves. So we often feel that if we don't keep giving out, we're not caring. What she's actually saying is you will care better when you hold something in reserve, when you've got a pool, when you're not running on empty. So pay attention to your physical reactions, but to your emotional reactions. Use those grounding techniques. You might actually not just want to wait and use one when you're feeling crisis, but actually use them on a regular basis when you've come out of any difficult conversation or situation. Be realistic about what you can and can't do, and teach yourself to let go of what you can't do. Be careful of the stress and the trauma that you expose yourself to on a day-to-day basis. When we're in a situation like this, when we turn the TV or the radio or we go online, we are constantly being bombarded with traumatic news. You might want to turn that off. You might want to limit your exposure to it. Choose to have deliberately non-virus related conversations. All conversation at the moment is being dominated by the situation we're in. We actually need to have some time out from all of that. When you're hearing traumatic stories, you can be sympathetic and attentive without being absorbed into the story. Try not to picture it if someone's relating a story to you. Try to actually almost disengage for a moment or two. Look out of the window for a second. Tense your muscles, whatever it is. We actually sometimes need to disengage a bit from the story as it's being told to us. Otherwise, we get taken and absorbed into it. Listen to whether you are experiencing trauma reactions and learn how to bring yourself back down, to ground yourself, and try to develop some kind of relaxation technique that you do regularly that works for you. So in the information that we hope will be on Spring Harvest website, and we are going to make it available elsewhere, we'll put something in that's called a self-care plan. And I'm afraid that self-care is a discipline. It's something we have to make a priority, that we care for our own health and our own well-being. The self-care plan, you can use the one that we will make available to you. Looks at all of these aspects that we've talked about, these 6 aspects of work, physical, relational, emotional, psychological, and spiritual. We start by looking at what do we currently do that lowers our stress levels, re-energizes us, makes us feel better about ourselves. We may need to then think about other activities if there's gaps. But when we think about what we might be able to do, we need to be very specific and we need to be very realistic. It's no good saying I'm going to have an hour's meditation every morning and every evening when we know that life just won't make that happen. So be very realistic about what you can do. Think honestly about whether you've got any bad or negative coping mechanisms and what you could do to minimise those. You'll only be able to minimise them if you put something else in place, because at the moment they're fulfilling a function. Think about what you hope to achieve. Have a goal. What do you want to actually achieve from this self-care? And make the plan visible. Perhaps you might need even to share it with someone. It's a bit like the kind of the Weight Watchers concept, that if we can share things, if we're all in it together, if we can be a bit accountable, we're much more likely to do it. And stick to doing self-care, whether you feel good or not. The temptation is always, oh, I'm feeling fine, I don't need to do that anymore. And then we don't start redoing it until we feel terrible again. But it's a discipline. It's the every day, it's the every week, the every month, not the once in a while or when we hit a low point. And then in a period of time, perhaps a month, 2 months, reassess how you're getting on. Is it making a difference? Are the things that I said I'd do that just aren't working? And experiment again. and see how effective some of the things that you've been doing are. If they're effective, keep doing them. If they're not, think about other things that might make a change to you. But keep going at it. Self care is so important. Keep doing it and take care of yourselves.
Okay, I think Sue mentioned I was going to look at some way of just a simple exercise that we can learn to start to de-stress ourselves, get us out of a feeling traumatized or panicky. Um, and it utilizes possibly the best tools at our disposal to do this, which is our mind and our body. It's something that was developed after 9/11. It's called heart breath. There are variations on this. I'm just going to do this because it only takes about a minute to do. And the design is when you're feeling stressed or what have you, to get you back into a calm but alert state of mind. And it's clinically, there's two things. So I'd like to start with the mind and just switch off. And if you're willing to, just call to mind something in life you genuinely and really do appreciate. Um, the only thing I'm banning is something to do with your working or caring role. That's the trap. Please do not do that. Just something, it can be a song, a special place you've visited or you'd love to visit, a picture, a poem, a story, anything you like, a film. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's something you genuinely appreciate about life. Um, Now I want to think about our breathing and our heartbeat. When we're stressed, our heartbeat goes up. We tend not to breathe properly. We tend to breathe from the top part of our chests. We don't get enough oxygen, so we breathe a bit faster, and heartbeat goes up, and blah 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 blah. Is to get out of that pattern. So it does require discipline. If you are physically able to do this, please do it. If this is dangerous for you physically because of some underlying health condition, please do not. But just adapt it in any way that suits for you. What I'd like you to do, just to start with, is to, without holding your breath, breathe in for 5 seconds, and very importantly, breathe out over 5 seconds. It does something to the nervous systems in our body. So I'm just going to do that for a few breaths. So you have to breathe in slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5. In. 2, 3, 4, 5. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5. Just keep that pattern of breaths going. And as you do, bring into mind, try and analyze anything, just bring into mind that thing that you appreciate in life. And allow those feelings of appreciation. It's more than gratitude, it's actual appreciation to come over you. Allow you to experience them as you breathe. And just try and do that for about a minute. Okay, I'll leave you doing that and just explain to you how that works. If we will put this into the notes and what have you. But it slows the heartbeat down, it regulates your breathing, and our bodies start adjusting themselves and our minds to function the way they are created to. We'll hopefully end up in a calm but alert state of mind. This isn't designed to send us to sleep. There's nothing spiritual about this. You can incorporate this sort of thing with prayer. There's no reason not to. But I just want to get over the fact that this is nothing magical, mystical. It's been clinically shown how it works. But what was shown in studies, that feeling of all the positive emotional approaches we can take, more than love, peace, gratitude, that sense of appreciation made a positive difference to the outcome. It won't work miracles, it's something that works over time. And one of the medical effects is it has been shown that it can improve the health of our heart. So it works with the cardiovascular system. And what particular chemicals are being released from the brain, I'm not sure, but the particular combination of this mind and body has been shown to be very effective. Again, do be patient. If you can do it a minute at a time, once or twice a day, over time, it may help you to just calm yourselves down, and it will enable, if we do all this self-care and whatever else works for you. Funnily enough, if we take care of ourselves, and going back to Rick Warren, we're free to donate, we will actually care for others more effectively. Okay, thank you for listening. I'd like to end now with a prayer of grace for ourselves. We'll put this, I hope, into the pack, and I'm going to use the word you, but if you say this for yourself, put your name into it. Put your own name into it. Don't worry about other people this time. This is the time to receive from God. And it's a gradual thing. It's not going to, well, who knows, but I'd just like to end this with a time of prayer. To just hear this as God speaking to you where you need to hear it. Know that God accepts you. God loves you. God gives himself to you. God is in the very core of your being. You are in the presence of God. You are in the arms of God. You are in the love of God. You are in the kingdom of God. You are in the heart of God. And God is in the heart of you. Spirit of the living God, present with us now and in all our nows, give each of us the healing, the renewing, the rest, the encouragement, the blessing that you want to give us and know that we need at this time. Amen. Okay, thank you for bearing with us. We've tried to cover vast grounds in a relatively short space of time. We will put this notes on the Spring Harvest website with perhaps some more exercises and things that can help us. It will also, I'm assured by the boss from ACC sitting next to me, will be on the ACC website, which is www.acc-org.uk.
acc-uk.org.
Oh, whoops.
acc-uk.org.
It's what happens when you let strange women put their hands on your head. Okay. Yeah, we can't do a take two, so there we go. Please, at this terrible, difficult time, please look after yourselves. Please care for yourselves. And hear that as a message from God. And then you are free to care for others. Thank you.
Thank you.